In the quiet hours of evening, when the world begins to settle and the mind seeks rest, there exists a space where ancient wisdom meets modern struggle. This is a journey into the heart of Buddhist teachings, a gentle exploration of one of humanity's most persistent fears, the fear of failure. As you prepare to drift into sleep, allow these words to wash over you like a calm stream, carrying away the weight of expectation and the burden of perfectionism. The Buddha taught that suffering arises not from our experiences themselves, but from our resistance to them, our clinging to outcomes we cannot control. Tonight, you will learn to release that grip, to find peace in the uncertain, and to discover that what we call failure is often simply life teaching us to walk a different path. Let your breath slow, your body soften, and your mind open to these timeless truths that have guided seekers for thousands of years toward liberation from fear itself. There was once a young potter named Kenzo who lived in a small village at the foot of a mountain. For 3 years he had studied under Master Tanaka, the most renowned ceramicist in the region. Kenzo's hands moved with precision over the clay, his understanding of form and glaze deepening with each passing season. But there was one type of vessel he could not master, the tea bowl used in ceremonies, simple in appearance, yet requiring perfect balance of spirit and technique. Month after month, Kenzo threw hundreds of bowls on his wheel. Month after month, each one emerged flawed. Some cracked in the kiln, others sat awkwardly weighted. And still others lacked the subtle quality his master called presence. With each imperfect bowl, Kenzo's confidence eroded. He began to wake at night, chest tight with anxiety, convinced he would never achieve what his master could create, seemingly without effort. His fear of failure became so consuming that his hands began to tremble as he approached the wheel. One morning, Master Tanaka found Kenzo sitting before a mound of broken clay, tears streaming down his face. "I have failed you," Kenzo said, voice breaking. "After 3 years, I cannot create a single worthy bowl. Perhaps I was never meant to be a potter." The master said nothing at first. He simply sat beside his student and picked up a piece of the broken clay. He held it gently, turning it over in his weathered hands. Then he spoke softly. "Tell me, when did you decide that these bowls had failed?" Kenzo looked confused. "They are broken or imperfect. They cannot serve their purpose." Master Tanaka smiled. "And what purpose is that?" "To hold tea during ceremony, to bring peace to those who use them." "I see," the master replied. "And tell me, in these 3 years of creating bowls, have you not found moments of deep peace? Have you not learned patience, humility, and dedication? Has the clay not taught you about pressure and release, about the nature of transformation through fire?" Kenzo paused, considering. "Yes, but the bowls themselves." "The bowls are a byproduct," Master Tanaka interrupted gently. "You have been suffering because you believed the destination was a perfect bowl. But the true purpose was always the journey of becoming someone who could create one. Every broken bowl taught you something essential. Every cracked rim showed you where you applied too much pressure. Every collapsed wall revealed where your center was off balance. These were not failures, Kenzo. These were teachers." The young potter sat in silence as this truth settled into him like rain into dry earth. He had been so focused on the outcome, on proving himself worthy, on avoiding the shame of imperfection, that he had missed the transformation happening within him through the very process he feared was failing. Master Tanaka continued, "In Zen, we speak of beginner's mind, approaching each moment fresh, without the burden of past failures or future expectations. You have lost your beginner's mind because you are haunted by all the bowls you consider failures. But what if you released that judgment? What if tomorrow you approach the wheel as if for the first time, with curiosity rather than dread?" That night, Kenzo could not sleep. He sat in the workshop, surrounded by his broken attempts, and for the first time, he truly looked at them without shame. In the dim light, he began to see what the master meant. This bowl had taught him about the speed of the wheel. That one had shown him how humidity affected the clay. Another had revealed his tendency to rush the final shaping. Each piece was a lesson, a stepping stone, a necessary part of his path. As dawn broke, something shifted in Kenzo's chest. The tight knot of fear began to loosen. He realized he had been carrying an impossible burden. The belief that he should already be where he was trying to go. That learning itself was a form of failure. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering, and Kenzo had been attached to an idea of himself as a master before he had truly been a student. He had been so afraid of failure that he had failed to be present for his own growth. In that moment of recognition, Kenzo felt a spaciousness open within him. He stood and approached the wheel with different energy, not the desperate grasping of someone trying to prove themselves, but the open curiosity of someone genuinely interested in meeting the clay exactly as it was. His hands settled onto the wet earth, and for the first time in months, they did not tremble. He was not trying to create a perfect bowl. He was simply present with the process, breath synchronized with the turning wheel, mind empty of judgment. The bowl that emerged that morning was not perfect by conventional standards. It had a slight irregularity in the rim, a subtle wavering in the wall. But it had something else. That quality Master Tanaka called presence. The mark of something created without fear, without grasping, without the burden of needing to be anything other than what it was. When Master Tanaka arrived at the workshop, he found Kenzo sitting quietly beside this new bowl. The student looked up at his teacher with tears in his eyes again, but this time they were different. Tears of understanding rather than despair. "I see you have met your teacher," Master Tanaka said, gesturing to the bowl. "Which teacher?" Kenzo asked. "The bowl or the fear?" "They are the same," the master replied. "Fear itself is one of our greatest teachers. If we can learn to turn toward it rather than run from it, your fear of failure has been a doorway, Kenzo. You just needed to walk through it instead of standing frozen before it." This story illuminates a fundamental teaching in Buddhism, that our relationship to failure shapes our experience of it more than the failure itself. The Buddha spoke of the two arrows of suffering. The first arrow is the painful experience itself. In Kenzo's case, creating imperfect bowls. The second arrow is our reaction to that experience. The shame, the self-judgment, the fear, the stories we tell about what it means about us. While we cannot always control the first arrow, we have complete control over whether we shoot ourselves with the second. Kenzo's true suffering was not in the broken bowls, but in his interpretation of them as evidence of his unworthiness. When he released that interpretation, when he learned to see his so-called failures as teachers rather than judgments, the fear loosened its grip. This is not merely philosophical wisdom, it is a practical teaching that changes how we move through our lives. Consider for a moment your own relationship with failure. How often do you replay past mistakes, using them as evidence that you should not try again? How often does the fear of potential failure prevent you from beginning something meaningful? How much energy do you spend trying to maintain an image of competence, terrified that others will see your struggles? The Buddha taught that this suffering is optional, that we can develop a different relationship with imperfection through understanding and practice. As you lie here tonight, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of your body supported by what lies beneath you, consider what might be possible if you released your fear of failure as Kenzo did. What would you attempt if you knew that every stumble was simply information, every mistake a teacher, every seeming failure just one step on a longer path? The teaching of non-attachment in Buddhism does not mean we should not care about outcomes or try our best. Rather, it means we release our rigid grip on specific results, our identification with success or failure as defining who we are. We can hold our goals lightly, like water cupped in open hands, rather than clenched in fists, where it inevitably leaks through our fingers. There was another student who came to study with a different master, a teacher named Seiko who lived alone in a small hermitage in the forest. This student, a woman named Hana, was a scholar who had spent years studying Buddhist texts, but felt she had failed to truly understand their deepest meanings. She came to Seiko with a heavy heart, convinced that her years of study had been wasted, that she lacked the capacity for true realization. Master Seiko listened to Hana's confession of failure without interruption. When the young woman finished, the master asked her to take a walk through the forest. They walked in silence for some time, until they came upon an ancient oak tree. Its trunk split down the middle, clearly struck by lightning years before. Yet from that split trunk, two separate crowns of branches reached toward the sky, both thick with leaves and acorns. "Tell me," Master Seiko said, "has this tree failed because it was struck by lightning?" Hana looked at the thriving oak, its split trunk creating a unique and powerful form. "No," she said slowly. "It adapted. It found a way to continue growing from what might have killed it." "And is it less of a tree because it does not have the single straight trunk we typically expect?" the master pressed. "No," Hana replied, beginning to understand. "It is perhaps more interesting, more resilient, more fully itself because of what it experienced." Master Seiko nodded. "Your years of study have not been a failure because you have not yet achieved what you imagined enlightenment should look like. Like this tree, you have grown in the way that was available to you, shaped by your particular circumstances and challenges. The split in your certainty, the breaking open of your assumptions, these are not failures. They are how the light gets in." This teaching points to another essential truth about failure in the Buddhist view. We often measure ourselves against arbitrary standards. What we think success should look like, how quickly we think we should progress, what others seem to achieve with ease. But each person's path is unique, shaped by karma, circumstances, temperament, and countless other factors. Comparing your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 20 is a form of self-imposed suffering. The Buddha encouraged his followers to be a light unto yourself, to find their own way rather than merely imitating others. Hana had been failing because she was trying to fit her understanding into frameworks created by others rather than trusting her own direct experience. Her struggle was not a sign of inadequacy, but an indication that she was grappling genuinely with profound questions rather than accepting superficial answers. Master Seiko invited Hana to stay at the hermitage and continue her practice, but she gave her an unusual instruction. "Each day, I want you to fail at something intentionally. Try a meditation technique you have never attempted and notice how awkward you feel. Prepare a meal with ingredients you have never used and accept that it may not taste good. Sing even though you believe you cannot carry a tune. Practice failing without shame and report to me what you learn." Hana found this instruction bewildering at first, but she followed it. The first day, she attempted a complex chanting practice she had read about but never tried. Her pronunciation was clumsy, her rhythm off, her concentration scattered. She felt the familiar heat of embarrassment rising in her chest, the voice of self-judgment beginning its familiar litany of criticism. But then she remembered the master's instruction, to practice failing without shame. She paused and simply observed the physical sensations of embarrassment without adding a story to them. The heat in her chest, the tension in her shoulders, the quickening of her breath. These were just sensations, not evidence of anything except that she was trying something new. As she continued the practice over the following days and weeks, something remarkable happened. The fear of failure began to lose its power over her. When she intentionally did things poorly, without the burden of needing to excel, she discovered a lightness she had not felt since childhood. She remembered what it was like to try something simply because it was interesting, not because she needed to prove anything. She began to laugh at her mistakes rather than cringe from them. And in that laughter, in that willingness to be imperfect, something deeper opened. Her meditation practice actually deepened, not because she was trying harder, but because she was trying less. She was simply being present with what was, without the constant evaluation of whether it was good enough. One evening, after Hana had been at the hermitage for 3 months, Master Seiko invited her to tea. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the light fade through the trees. Finally, the master spoke. "Tell me, have you failed today?" Hana smiled. "I tried to fix the gate and made it worse. I attempted to transplant some herbs and forgot to water them properly, so they wilted. I chanted the evening prayers and lost my place 3 times. "And how do you feel about these failures?" the master asked. Hana considered the question carefully. "I feel human. I feel present. I feel like I'm learning. I don't feel like a failure anymore, even when things fail." Master Seiko nodded slowly. "Then you have learned what your years of study were trying to teach you. Enlightenment is not the perfection of performance. It is the perfection of acceptance. Accepting reality exactly as it is, including your own human limitations. You have not failed to understand the teachings, Hana. You have been living them, learning them in your bones rather than just your mind. Your struggle itself was the teaching." Tears filled Hana's eyes as she felt the truth of these words resonate through her body. She had been searching for some distant realization, some dramatic transformation that would prove she had finally succeeded in her spiritual path. But the real transformation had been happening all along. In each moment, she chose to continue practicing despite feeling inadequate. In each moment, she returned to meditation even after a scattered session. In each moment, she picked up a text again, even when the previous one had confused her. Her willingness to persist in the face of feeling like a failure was itself the expression of enlightened action. The Buddha taught that enlightenment is not something we attain in the future. It is our true nature, always present, simply obscured by our delusions and attachments. One of the primary delusions is the belief that we are separate from enlightenment, that we must become something other than what we are. This delusion is reinforced every time we judge ourselves as failures, every time we believe that our imperfections disqualify us from awakening. But the masters teach that it is precisely through seeing our imperfections clearly, without judgment or denial, that we begin to recognize the perfect Buddha nature that was never diminished by our human struggles. As you rest here tonight, consider Hana's journey. She did not transcend her fear of failure by finally succeeding at everything she attempted. She transcended it by changing her relationship to failure itself, by practicing imperfection without shame, by recognizing that the trying was more important than the outcome. What would your life look like if you gave yourself permission to be a beginner again, to stumble and fall, to learn slowly, to make mistakes without making them mean something about your fundamental worth? The Buddhist concept of beginner's mind, which we touched upon earlier, is deeply relevant to releasing the fear of failure. Shunryu Suzuki, a Zen master who brought these teachings to the West, famously said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." When we approach life with beginner's mind, we are open, curious, and free from the burden of needing to already know. We can explore without the fear of being exposed as inadequate because we are openly acknowledging that we are learning. But when we pretend to be experts, when we build our identity around being competent and successful, every failure threatens that carefully constructed image. We become rigid, defensive, afraid to try anything where we might look foolish. Paradoxically, this fear of failure often ensures that we never develop true mastery, because mastery requires going through countless failures in the learning process. Consider the child learning to walk. She falls hundreds of times, but she does not lie on the floor thinking, "I am a failure at walking. Perhaps I am simply not a walking person. I should give up and just crawl for the rest of my life." She simply gets up and tries again, naturally, without self-judgment. Failure is just part of the process of learning to walk. At some point in our development, we lose this natural relationship with failure. We begin to internalize messages from our culture, our families, our educational systems that categorize us as successes or failures based on our performance. We learn to feel shame when we do not meet expectations. We develop what psychologists call a fixed mindset, believing that our abilities are static rather than developable. The Buddhist teachings offer an antidote to this conditioning. They remind us that everything is impermanent and constantly changing, including ourselves. We are not fixed entities who either have certain abilities or do not. We are processes, constantly unfolding, always capable of learning and growing. The monk Nagarjuna taught about emptiness, the concept that nothing has inherent, unchanging existence. This applies to our sense of self as much as anything else. There is no permanent you who is fundamentally a failure or a success. There are simply moments, actions, consequences, and the stories we tell about them. When we understand this deeply, the fear of failure loosens, because we recognize that failure does not define us in any ultimate way. It is simply an experience that arises and passes, like everything else in this impermanent existence. There was once a monastery where monks gathered to practice meditation and study the Dharma. Among them was a monk named Jiro, who was known for his fierce determination. Jiro had come to the monastery later in life, in his mid-30s, after leaving a successful career in business. He had achieved everything his society measured as success: wealth, status, recognition, but found himself profoundly unhappy, sensing that something essential was missing from his life. When he arrived at the monastery, he brought with him the same intense drive that had made him successful in business. He was determined to excel at meditation, to master the teachings faster than the other monks, to prove that he could succeed in this realm just as he had in the secular world. The abbot, an elderly teacher named Ryonen, observed Jiro's approach with concerned compassion. In their first meeting, Jiro outlined his goals. He would meditate for hours each day, memorize all the essential sutras within 6 months, and achieve significant realization within a year. Abbot Ryonen listened patiently, then asked a simple question. "And what will you do if you fail to meet these goals?" Jiro looked surprised. "I won't fail. I didn't become successful by accepting failure as an option. I simply work harder than everyone else." The abbot smiled gently. "I see. Then you have brought your greatest obstacle with you to the monastery." Jiro felt confused and slightly insulted. His refusal to accept failure had been his strength, the quality that had set him apart. How could it be an obstacle? But he said nothing, simply bowed and went to begin his intensive practice. For the first few months, Jiro's approach seemed to work. His natural intelligence and discipline allowed him to memorize texts quickly and sit in meditation for long periods. But as time went on, something began to shift. The harder he pushed, the more rigid he became. His meditation sessions, rather than deepening his peace, became endurance tests filled with tension. He found himself constantly evaluating his performance, comparing himself to the other monks, measuring his progress against his internal timeline. He was meditating on his meditation rather than simply meditating. 6 months passed, and Jiro had indeed memorized many sutras, but he found that the words remained merely intellectual knowledge, not lived wisdom. 8 months passed, and he had maintained his rigorous schedule, but he felt further from peace than when he had arrived. The more desperately he grasped for enlightenment, the more it seemed to slip through his fingers. He began to experience what the teachings call spiritual materialism, trying to accumulate enlightenment as he had once accumulated wealth, treating awakening as another achievement to conquer. One evening, during a particularly frustrating meditation session, Jiro felt something break inside him. All the tension, the striving, the fear of spiritual failure came crashing down. He began to weep, not quietly, but with great heaving sobs that he could not control. He felt ashamed. A grown man, a former business executive, crying like a child, because he could not force his mind into enlightenment. The other monks sat unmoved in their meditation, accustomed to such releases, but Jiro felt utterly exposed in his failure. He left the meditation hall and walked into the garden, sitting beneath a plum tree in the darkness. He felt defeated in a way he had never experienced before. In business, when one strategy failed, you could simply work harder or try a different approach. But here, working harder seemed to be the problem itself. He did not know how to succeed by not trying to succeed. As he sat there in the darkness, Abbot Ryanan appeared silently and sat beside him. The old teacher did not speak at first, simply shared the space with Jiro's pain. Finally, Jiro broke the silence. "I cannot do this. I have failed at the one thing that truly matters. I achieved success in a life that meant nothing, and now I cannot achieve success in the life that means everything." Abbot Ryanan was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Tell me, Jiro, what is trying to succeed right now? What is it that fears failure?" Jiro considered the question. "I am, my mind, my sense of self." "And who is aware of this self that fears failure?" the abbot asked. Jiro paused, confused. I am aware of it." "So there is a self that fears, and an awareness that observes this fearful self?" the abbot continued. "Yes, I suppose so," Jiro replied, uncertain where this was leading. "Then which one are you truly? Are you the self that fears and strives, or are you the awareness that can observe this self without being caught in it?" Abbot Ryanan asked. Something shifted in Jiro's understanding. For a moment, he could sense both aspects, the grasping, fearful part of his mind, and a deeper awareness that was simply witnessing it all without judgment. That witnessing awareness was not afraid of failure because it was not trying to achieve anything. It simply was, present and spacious, whether Jiro was succeeding or failing at his goals. "The self that fears failure is not your true nature," the abbot said softly. "It is a construction, a pattern of thought and emotion that you have identified with. But you are not that pattern. You are the awareness in which all patterns arise and dissolve. When you truly understand this, there is no one left to fail." This teaching points to one of the most profound aspects of Buddhist wisdom regarding failure. Our fear of failure is always bound up with our sense of a separate self that needs to be protected, enhanced, and proven. This self, what Buddhism calls the ego, is constantly engaged in a project of self-improvement, always trying to become better, to achieve more, to be worthy. But the deeper teaching is that this separate self is itself a kind of illusion, a mental construct, rather than an ultimate reality. When we begin to recognize our true nature as awareness itself rather than the content of awareness, the fear of failure begins to lose its grip. The waves may still rise and fall, success and failure, pleasure and pain, but they do not disturb the ocean's depths. Jiro sat with this teaching, not fully understanding it intellectually, but sensing something true in it. Over the following months, his practice shifted dramatically. He stopped trying to achieve enlightenment and instead simply showed up each day to practice, to learn, to be present. When his meditation was scattered, he observed it without self-judgment. When he could not remember a teaching, he admitted it without shame. When he felt frustrated or discouraged, he acknowledged those feelings as passing weather patterns rather than fundamental truths about his worth. Slowly, paradoxically, his practice deepened, not because he was trying harder, but because he was allowing himself to be exactly where he was. The abbot had given him permission to fail, and in that permission, he found a strange kind of freedom. He realized that his whole life he had been running from failure, and that running had been exhausting. What would it be like to stop running, to turn and face the thing he feared, to discover that it could not actually destroy him? There is a famous story in Zen about a monk who asked his master, "What is Buddha?" The master replied, 3 pounds of flax. This seemingly nonsensical answer points to something essential. Buddha nature, our true nature, is not some exalted thing separate from ordinary reality. It is right here, in 3 pounds of flax, in washing dishes, in tying your shoes, in failing at what you attempted today. We do not need to become someone different or achieve something extraordinary to realize our Buddha nature. We simply need to stop overlooking it while we chase after ideas of spiritual success. As you lie here tonight, breathing slowly, feeling yourself held by the earth beneath you, consider this question that Abbot Ryanan posed to Jiro. What is it that fears failure? Can you sense a difference between the part of you that anxiously evaluates and judges, and a deeper awareness that simply observes all of this with compassion? This awareness does not need you to be successful. It is already complete, already whole, already at peace. Your failures cannot diminish it. Your successes cannot enhance it. It simply is, like the sky that remains unchanged whether clouds pass through it or not. The practice of Buddhism is, in many ways, a practice of returning again and again to this awareness, this presence that is not caught up in the stories of success and failure. We do this through meditation, through mindfulness, through examining our thoughts and beliefs, through cultivating compassion for ourselves and others. Each time we notice we are lost in fear or judgment and gently return to present awareness, we are practicing liberation from the tyranny of the ego's constant evaluation. This is not a practice we perfect. It is a practice we return to, again and again, each return itself a victory regardless of how many times we wandered away. There was another student, a young man named Taro, who came to study meditation at a different center. Taro had suffered from severe anxiety his entire life, and much of his anxiety centered on a fear of failure. He was paralyzed by perfectionism, unable to start projects because he could not guarantee their success, unable to finish projects because they never met his impossibly high standards. His life had become smaller and smaller as he avoided more and more situations where he might fail. When Taro began meditation practice, he hoped it would eliminate his anxiety, cure his fear of failure, make him into a calm and confident person. But meditation did not work, as Taro expected. When he sat to meditate, his mind was chaotic, jumping from thought to thought, rehearsing past embarrassments and imagining future failures. He felt like he was failing at meditation itself, which only added another layer of anxiety. He could not even succeed at the practice that was supposed to help him stop worrying about success. His teacher, a woman named Keiko, had a different approach than he expected. When Taro confessed that he was terrible at meditation, that his mind was too restless, that he was failing at the practice, Keiko smiled and said, "Good. You are having a completely normal human experience of meditation. Welcome." Taro was confused. "But I thought meditation was supposed to make my mind calm and clear. I thought I would be able to focus without all these thoughts." Keiko nodded. "Many people have that expectation. But that is like expecting that the first time you sit at a piano, you will play a beautiful concerto. The mind has been running wild for your entire life. It will take time and patience to develop concentration. And even then, some days will be easier than others. Some days your mind will be relatively calm, and some days it will be like a storm. Both are okay. Both are just what is happening. But how is that okay?" Taro asked, frustrated. "If meditation doesn't calm my mind, what's the point?" "The point," Keiko said gently, "is not to change what is happening, but to change your relationship to what is happening. Right now, when your mind is busy, you add a layer of suffering by judging yourself as failing. You have anxiety, and then you have anxiety about having anxiety. You are restless, and then you condemn yourself for being restless. The practice is learning to observe the busy mind without adding that second layer of judgment." Taro tried to understand this, but it seemed impossible. How could he not judge himself when he was clearly not doing the practice correctly? Keiko gave him a specific instruction. "For the next week, I want you to meditate for just 10 minutes each day. Your only job is to notice when your mind wanders And when you notice, mentally say thinking to yourself very gently, like you are greeting an old friend. Then return your attention to your breath. That's it. You are not trying to stop thoughts or calm your mind. You are just practicing noticing thoughts and returning to breath over and over. Taro began this practice, and at first he found himself saying thinking dozens of times in a single 10-minute session. His mind wandered constantly, to his worries about work, to embarrassing moments from years ago, to fears about the future, to judgments about how poorly he was meditating. But he followed Keiko's instruction, gently noting thinking and returning to his breath each time. Something began to shift after a few days. He noticed that there was a small gap between when a thought arose and when he got completely caught up in it. In that gap, he had a choice. He could either follow the thought into a whole story, or he could note it and return to his breath. As he practiced finding these gaps, they seemed to widen slightly. More significantly, he began to notice how harsh he was with himself throughout the day, not just in meditation. Every small mistake triggered an internal voice of criticism. "You idiot, you forgot your keys again. Why did you say that? You sounded stupid. You'll never be successful if you keep making these kinds of errors." He had been speaking to himself this way for so long that he had not even noticed it. The meditation practice was making this pattern visible for the first time. When Taro returned to see Keiko after a few weeks, he shared this observation. "I'm starting to realize that I have a voice in my head that constantly judges me as a failure, even for tiny things. I never noticed how relentless it is." Keiko nodded. "This is a valuable insight. This voice is what Buddhism calls the comparing mind. It constantly measures you against some ideal standard and finds you lacking. It is trying to protect you from failure by criticizing you first, before others can, but in doing so, it creates constant suffering." "How do I make it stop?" Taro asked. "You don't," Keiko replied. "That would just be another form of rejection, another way of judging something as wrong. Instead, you learn to recognize this voice as just one more thought pattern arising in awareness. You can hear it without believing it, without taking it as truth. You can say, 'Ah, there is the comparing mind again,' and not give it your full attention and energy." "But what if it's right?" Taro asked. "What if I really am failing?" Keiko leaned forward. "Tell me, what does it mean to fail? Really, what is failure?" Taro thought about this. "It means not achieving what you set out to do, not meeting your goals, not living up to expectations." "And who sets these goals and expectations?" Keiko pressed. "I do, or society does, or other people do," Taro answered. "Exactly. Failure is not an objective fact. It is a judgment, an interpretation. The same event can be seen as failure, or as learning, as loss, or as redirection, depending on the story you tell about it. You are suffering not from actual failure, but from your interpretation of your experiences as failure." This was a radical idea for Taro. He had always assumed that failure was an objective reality. You either succeeded at something or you failed at it. But Keiko was suggesting that failure was a mental construction, a way of framing experience that was not the only way. "Let me give you an example," Keiko continued. "Imagine two people apply for the same job. Both are rejected. One person interprets this as a failure that confirms his unworthiness, becomes depressed, and stops applying for jobs. The other person interprets it as information that this particular job was not the right fit, updates his resume based on what he learned from the process, and continues applying elsewhere. Same event, completely different relationship to it. Which person is truly failing?" Taro saw the point. The first one. But what if you keep getting rejected over and over? At what point is it just reality that you're not good enough? "That is the fear talking," Keiko said compassionately. "The fear that if you stop judging yourself harshly, if you stop driving yourself with the whip of potential failure, you will become complacent and never achieve anything." But I invite you to question this assumption. Has fear of failure actually helped you succeed, or has it paralyzed you? Has harsh self-judgment made you more capable, or has it sapped your confidence and joy? Taro had to admit that his fear of failure had mostly stopped him from trying things, and his harsh self-judgment had not made him more successful, but rather more anxious and miserable. Yet he could not imagine relating to himself differently. It felt dangerous, like giving up the very thing that motivated him. Keiko gave him another practice. Each evening before bed, I want you to write down 3 things you failed at that day. They can be tiny. You burned your toast, you interrupted someone, you forgot to send an email. Then, next to each failure, I want you to write what you learned from it, or how you grew because of it, or simply what quality you demonstrated by trying even though you failed. Do this every day for a month. Taro found this exercise challenging at first. It felt strange to intentionally focus on his failures, and it was even stranger to try to find something positive in them. But as he continued the practice, something began to shift. He started to see that failure was not a monolithic experience of humiliation and inadequacy, but rather a rich source of information and growth. The day he burned his toast because he was trying to multitask, he learned that he needed to slow down and focus on one thing at a time. The day he forgot to send an important email, he learned that he needed a better system for tracking tasks, and he created one. The day he tried to have a difficult conversation with a friend and it went poorly, he learned something about how his anxiety made him speak too quickly without listening, and he practiced listening more in the next conversation. Each failure was actually teaching him something, moving him forward, helping him develop skills and awareness he would not have developed if everything had gone smoothly. After a month of this practice, Taro met with Keiko again. "I'm starting to see what you meant," he said. "Failure isn't just one thing. Sometimes it's information. Sometimes it's a redirection. Sometimes it's just life being unpredictable. I'm still afraid of it, but the fear isn't as overwhelming." Keiko smiled. "Good. You are learning to dance with failure rather than run from it or be crushed by it. This is wisdom. Now let me ask you something. What is the biggest failure you are avoiding right now? What would you do if you were not afraid of failing?" Taro knew the answer immediately. For years, he had wanted to start his own small business, but the fear of failure had kept him in a job he disliked but felt secure in. The risk of trying and failing felt too dangerous, so he had simply not tried. "I want to start a business," he said quietly. "But I'm terrified it will fail, and I'll have wasted my savings and my time." Keiko nodded. "That is a real risk. The business might fail by conventional measures. But let me ask you this. If you start this business and it does not succeed financially, but in the process, you learn valuable skills, meet interesting people, discover things about yourself, and have the experience of trying something you deeply care about. Is that failure?" Taro considered this carefully. From his old perspective, yes. If the business did not make money, it was a failure. But from the new perspective he was developing, maybe not. Maybe the real failure would be never trying, never knowing, spending his life in regret and wondering, what if? "I don't know," he said honestly. "I'm not sure anymore what failure even means." "That is a profound place to be," Keiko said. "When you are no longer certain of your definitions, you are open to seeing things as they actually are, rather than through your conditioned beliefs. The Buddha taught that one of the greatest sources of suffering is our tendency to impose rigid categories on fluid reality. We call this failure, that success, this good, that bad, and in doing so, we miss the more complex truth of how things actually are. Everything is more interconnected, more ambiguous, more workable than our categories suggest. This teaching is essential for anyone gripped by fear of failure. We suffer because we have learned to divide our experience into the acceptable and the unacceptable, the successful and the failed. We then spend enormous energy trying to control our lives to stay in the acceptable category. But the Buddha taught that this control is ultimately impossible. Life is impermanent, constantly changing, subject to conditions we cannot fully manage. No matter how carefully we plan, how hard we try, how much we achieve, we will all eventually experience loss, aging, death, and countless small failures along the way. This is not pessimism, it is realism. The question is not whether we will fail, but how we will relate to failure when it comes. As Taro continued his practice, he did eventually start his small business. It did not go as planned. Few businesses do. He made mistakes, lost money, faced setbacks, had to adjust his vision multiple times. By his old standards, he might have called it a failure, but by his new understanding, he was succeeding at the very act of trying, of learning, of staying present with uncertainty, of not abandoning himself when things got difficult. The business eventually became modestly successful, but more importantly, Taro became someone who could handle failure without being destroyed by it. He had developed what psychologists call resilience and what Buddhists call equanimity, the capacity to remain present and balanced whether things are going well or poorly. This equanimity is not indifference or apathy. It is a profound acceptance of reality as it is, combined with wise effort to make things better where possible. It is holding both the aspiration to succeed and the acceptance of whatever actually happens. There is a traditional Buddhist teaching called the 8 worldly winds, which describes 4 pairs of experiences that blow us around if we are not grounded in wisdom: pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute. We tend to crave the first of each pair and avoid the second. But the teaching is that both are inevitable parts of human life. Both arise and pass away, and our peace cannot depend on experiencing only the ones we prefer. When we base our sense of well-being on success, gain and praise, on avoiding failure, we set ourselves up for constant anxiety and disappointment. The winds will blow, sometimes in our favor, sometimes not. True peace comes from finding a stability that does not depend on which way the wind is blowing. This is not easy to develop. Our conditioning runs deep. We have learned since childhood that our worth is conditional, that love and acceptance depend on our performance, that failure makes us less valuable. These beliefs are reinforced constantly by cultures that worship success and hide failure. Social media shows us everyone's highlight reels while we compare them to our behind-the-scenes struggles. We see people's polished outcomes without seeing their messy processes. This creates a distorted sense of what normal human experience looks like, making us feel like uniquely inadequate failures when we struggle. The Buddhist path offers a radical alternative to this conditional self-worth. It teaches that your fundamental nature, call it Buddha nature, awareness, true self, or consciousness, is inherently complete and worthy. It has never been tarnished by your failures and cannot be enhanced by your successes. This nature is simply what you are beneath all the layers of conditioning, beneath all the stories about success and failure, beneath all the striving and achieving and comparing. To touch this nature, even briefly, is to experience a peace that does not depend on circumstances. This is what spiritual practice is pointing toward, not becoming a perfect person who never fails, but recognizing that you are never the limited, deficient self you believed yourself to be. There was once a very old monk named Izo who had been practicing for over 50 years. He was known for his wisdom and his laughter, and students often asked him about his secret to such apparent peace and joy. One day, a serious young student asked him, "Master Izo, you have been practicing for so long. Surely you no longer experience fear of failure. Surely you have transcended such petty concerns." Izo laughed heartily at this. Transcended? No, no. Just this morning I was working on a calligraphy piece and ruined it with a shaky stroke. I felt frustrated. I wanted it to be beautiful, and I failed. The fear of failure still arises, even after 50 years. The young student looked disappointed. Then what is the point of practice if these feelings do not go away? Izo's eyes twinkled. The point is not that the feelings go away. The point is that they do not take over the whole house anymore. Fear of failure knocks on the door. I say, "Ah, hello, old friend. Come in for tea." And we sit together for a little while. Then it leaves. I do not build my life around avoiding that knock on the door. I do not pretend the door should never be knocked upon. I simply answer the door with a light heart, knowing this too shall pass. This is a mature understanding of working with fear of failure. The goal is not to never feel the fear, but to change our relationship to it so that it does not control us. We can feel afraid and still act, still try, still risk. We can acknowledge the fear without believing everything it tells us, without letting it make our decisions. This is true courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward in its presence. Azo continued, "When I was a young monk, I was like you. I thought the point of practice was to fix myself, to become someone who never felt negative emotions, never made mistakes, never failed. I practiced very seriously, very strictly. And do you know what I discovered? The harder I tried to be perfect, the more miserable I became. I was creating a new form of suffering by demanding that I transcend suffering. One day, my teacher saw me struggling and asked me, 'Azo, who is the one trying to become perfect? And who is aware of this one trying?' That question broke something open in me. I realized I was so busy trying to improve myself that I had never simply rested as the awareness that was already complete, already whole, already free. From that day, my practice changed. I stopped trying to achieve some future enlightenment and started simply being present with what is, exactly as it is. The young student considered this. But if you are not trying to improve, why practice at all? "Oh, I am still practicing," Izo said with a smile. "But not from a place of deficiency, trying to become something I am not. I practice from a place of recognition, acknowledging what I already am beneath all the conditioning. I practice to remember, not to achieve. And this practice naturally expresses itself as compassion, as presence, as wise action in the world. But it is not driven by fear of failing to be enlightened. It is simply the natural flowering of understanding." This teaching points to a subtle but crucial distinction in spiritual practice. We can practice from two very different motivations, from a sense of lack, trying to fix ourselves and achieve some future state of perfection, or from a sense of wholeness, simply expressing and remembering our true nature. The first approach reinforces the very sense of inadequacy it is trying to overcome. The second approach begins to dissolve that inadequacy by recognizing it was always based on a misunderstanding of who we are. As you rest here, breathing gently, body relaxed, consider Izo's question. Who is the one who fears failure? Can you locate this one? Is it a solid entity, or is it more like a pattern of thoughts and feelings arising in your awareness? And what is it like to rest as the awareness itself prior to the pattern, spacious and still, like the sky, before any clouds appear? This is not merely philosophical speculation. This is an invitation to direct experience. Right now, in this moment, are you failing or succeeding? Or is this question itself a mental construction, a way of evaluating experience that you could simply set aside? What remains when you stop judging each moment as success or failure, when you simply allow this moment to be exactly as it is? There was a practitioner named Sayuri who suffered from deep shame about her past. Before coming to practice, she had made many mistakes. She had hurt people through careless actions, made poor decisions that affected her family, struggled with addiction, and done things she deeply regretted. Even years into recovery and practice, she carried the belief that she was fundamentally flawed, that her past failures defined her, that she did not deserve peace or happiness because of what she had done. Her teacher, a monk named Hakuin, listened to her confession of shame with deep compassion. When she finished, he asked her, "Sayuri, do you still do these things you regret?" "No," she said. "I've changed. I've made amends where I could. I live differently now." "Then who is the person who did those things?" Hakuin asked. Sayuri looked confused. I did them. That's the problem. Are you the same person you were then? Hakuin pressed. Your body has changed. Every cell has been replaced. Your mind has changed. You understand things differently now. Your behavior has changed. You act differently. In what sense are you the same person? Sayuri struggled with this, but I remember doing those things. I am responsible for them. Responsibility, yes, Hakuin agreed. You take responsibility for past actions and their consequences. This is wise and compassionate, but that is different from identifying yourself as permanently defined by those actions, as if there is a fixed, unchanging self called Sayuri, who is essentially a failure. The Buddha taught that the self is not a fixed thing, but a process, constantly changing. The you of today is not the you of that past moment. You are a continuation, yes, but not an unchanging identity. This teaching addresses one of the deepest sources of fear of failure, the belief that our failures reveal some permanent truth about who we are, that they stain us indelibly, that we become our mistakes. But Buddhism teaches the doctrine of no self or non-self, the understanding that what we call the self is actually a dynamic process rather than a static entity. Each moment, we are different than we were the moment before. We are more like a river than a rock, constantly flowing and changing. When we understand this deeply, we can take responsibility for our actions without identifying with them as permanently defining who we are. Sayuri's eyes filled with tears. But I feel like I failed at being a good person. I don't know how to forgive myself. Hakuin nodded with great tenderness. The one who cannot forgive is the one who is holding on to a fixed idea of how you should have been, who is comparing the reality of what was to an ideal of what should have been. But that should have been never existed. Only what was exists. You did the best you could with the understanding, capacity, and circumstances you had at that moment. It was not good enough to prevent harm. This is true and sad. But that does not mean you were capable of better in that moment. If you had been capable of better, you would have done better. No one chooses to fail or cause harm when they can see a better way. This is a profound teaching of compassion. We are all doing the best we can with the understanding and capacity we have in each moment. This does not mean we do not have responsibility or that harm does not matter. It means that blame and shame are not necessary or helpful. What is helpful is to learn from our mistakes, make amends where possible, develop greater capacity for wisdom and compassion, and release the burden of carrying our past as a permanent identity. Hakuin continued, I want you to try something. Each day, when you sit to meditate, I want you to bring to mind one of the failures you are ashamed of. But instead of rehearsing the shame, I want you to practice forgiveness. Say to yourself, I forgive myself for not being perfect. I was doing the best I could with what I had. I am learning and growing. I am not my past actions. Do this every day for 100 days. Sayuri committed to this practice, though it felt almost impossible at first. The shame was so familiar, so well worn, that forgiveness felt false, like she was letting herself off the hook for real harm. But her teacher had explained that forgiveness was not saying that harm did not matter. It was releasing the additional suffering of carrying shame indefinitely, which helped no one and prevented healing. Day by day, Sayuri practiced this forgiveness meditation. At first, the words felt hollow, but gradually, something began to soften. She started to see that the person who had made those mistakes was suffering, confused, acting from pain rather than malice. She began to feel compassion for that younger version of herself, even while acknowledging the harm that had been done. She began to understand that holding on to shame was a way of trying to control the past, to somehow make it different through the force of her regret. But the past was unchangeable. The only question was how she would carry it forward, as a burden that crushed her, or as lessons that informed her growth. By the end of the 100 days, Sayuri had not forgotten what had happened, but she no longer felt defined by it. She could acknowledge her past without it determining her present. She could take responsibility without taking on shame. She had failed in the past, yes, but she was not a failure in any permanent sense. She was a human being, learning and growing, stumbling and recovering like all human beings do. This transformation in Sayuri points to a crucial aspect of releasing the fear of failure, the practice of self-compassion. Research in psychology has shown that self-compassion is more effective than self-criticism for motivation and growth. When we respond to our failures with harsh self-judgment, we trigger shame and defensive reactions that actually interfere with learning. When we respond with compassion, acknowledging that failure is part of being human, that we are not alone in struggling, that we deserve kindness in our difficulty, we create the safety needed for genuine reflection and growth. The Buddhist practice of loving-kindness meditation, or metta, is a powerful tool for developing this self-compassion. In this practice, we systematically cultivate wishes for well-being, starting with ourselves. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. May I live with ease. For many people, offering loving-kindness to themselves is harder than offering it to others. We have been trained to be harsh with ourselves, to believe that we need criticism to improve, that self-kindness is self-indulgent. But the Buddha taught that compassion must include ourselves. In fact, he said that if you search the whole world, you will not find anyone more worthy of your love and compassion than yourself. This is not narcissism. It is recognizing that your well-being matters, that you deserve the same kindness you would offer to a dear friend, that treating yourself harshly creates suffering without producing genuine growth. When we begin to treat ourselves with the same compassion we would offer to someone we love, something shifts in our relationship to failure. When a dear friend tells us about a mistake they made, we do not berate them or tell them they are worthless. We listen with compassion. We acknowledge that it is hard. We help them see what they can learn. We remind them that everyone makes mistakes. We encourage them to try again. Why would we offer ourselves any less? As you lie here tonight, feeling the gentle rhythm of your breath, consider bringing to mind a failure that still troubles you, something you feel ashamed about or regretful of. Instead of rehearsing the familiar pattern of self-judgment, try speaking to yourself as you would to a beloved friend. This was hard. You did the best you could. Everyone makes mistakes. You are learning and growing. I am here with you in this difficulty. You are not alone. Notice what happens in your body and mind when you offer yourself this kindness. There was once a teacher who was famous for his skill in archery. Students came from distant lands to learn from him, hoping to become great archers themselves. One student, named Yoshiro, was particularly dedicated. He practiced every day for hours, trying to achieve the perfect shot, arrow striking the exact center of the target every time. But the more Yoshiro practiced, the more frustrated he became. He could hit the target most of the time, even hit near the center often, but perfect consistency eluded him. Some days he shot beautifully. Other days, his arrows seemed to have a mind of their own. He began to dread practice, to feel anxious before each shot, to believe he was failing as an archer. One day, the master noticed Yoshiro's frustration and asked him what was wrong. "I cannot master this," Yoshiro said. "I practice constantly, but I still miss. I still fail to achieve perfect shots. Perhaps I do not have the talent to be a true archer." The master handed Yoshiro his bow and said, "Show me a perfect shot." Yoshiro took careful aim, trying to calm his shaking hands, and released the arrow. It flew straight and true, striking just slightly off-center. "See," Yoshiro said miserably, "I failed. It's not perfect." The master walked to the target and placed his hand on it, right where the arrow had struck. "Tell me," he said, "if this had been the heart of an enemy attacking your village, would this arrow have failed?" Yoshiro considered. "No, it would have stopped the threat." "And if this had been a deer you were hunting to feed your family, would this arrow have failed?" the master continued. "No, it would have provided food, Yoshiro admitted. Then who has decided that this excellent shot is a failure? The master asked. Only you, measuring against an arbitrary idea of perfection. You are failing to appreciate the skill you have developed because you are obsessed with a fantasy of flawlessness that does not exist in the real world. The master sat down on the grass and gestured for Yoshiro to join him. Let me tell you something about mastery, he said. I have been practicing archery for 40 years. I still miss shots. I still have days when my aim is off, when my concentration wavers, when my arrows do not fly where I intend. Does this make me a failure? Yoshiro looked shocked. But you are the master. I thought at your level. At my level, I have accepted that perfection is not the goal. The master interrupted gently. The goal is presence, being fully here with this bow, this arrow, this breath, this moment. When I am present, my shots are usually good. But sometimes the wind shifts, or my body is tired, or my mind is preoccupied, and the arrow goes astray. This is not failure. This is being human, practicing an art within the constraints of an impermanent, ever-changing reality. This teaching is essential for releasing the fear of failure. We often have completely unrealistic standards for ourselves, standards of perfection that no one actually achieves. We look at masters in any field and imagine they no longer struggle, no longer make mistakes, no longer experience doubt or difficulty. But this is a fantasy. True masters have simply made peace with imperfection. They have learned to show up consistently, to practice with dedication, to accept both their good days and their bad days, to keep refining their skill while releasing attachment to flawless results. The master continued. The word master is misleading. It suggests someone who has control over something, who has conquered it. But true mastery is more like a deep friendship with your practice. You know its moods, its challenges, its gifts. You show up for it faithfully, not because you have transcended difficulty, but because you have learned to be present with difficulty. The archer does not master the bow. The archer develops a relationship with the bow, learning to work with it rather than against it, accepting that some factors will always remain beyond control. Yoshiro felt something release in his chest. He had been approaching archery as an enemy to be conquered, a test of his worth, a way to prove himself. But what if it was simply a practice? Something to show up for with presence and dedication, something to learn from regardless of the outcome of any particular shot. From now on, the master said, I want you to practice differently. Before each shot, take 3 breaths. On the first breath, release any expectation about where the arrow will go. On the second breath, bring your full attention to the feeling of the bow in your hand, the arrow against your fingers. On the third breath, let the shot happen without force, without grasping for a result. Then, after the arrow flies, before you look to see where it struck, take 3 more breaths. Thank the bow, thank the arrow, thank your body for participating in this practice. Only then look at the target, and whatever you see there, say to yourself, this is what happened in this moment. Tomorrow is a new moment. Yoshiro began practicing this way, and though his technical accuracy did not dramatically improve overnight, his experience of archery transformed completely. He no longer dreaded practice. He no longer felt like a failure when arrows missed the center. He began to enjoy the process itself, the feel of drawing the bow, the satisfying release, the flight of the arrow through air. He noticed that when he released expectation, his body actually performed better because it was not tight with anxiety. And on days when his shooting was off, he could observe it with curiosity rather than self-judgment, noticing what factors might be affecting his performance. The fear of failure had been replaced with engaged curiosity about the practice itself. This shift from performance-focused to process-focused is one of the most powerful ways to release fear of failure. When we measure ourselves only by outcomes, we set ourselves up for constant anxiety because outcomes are only partially under our control. But when we focus on the process, on showing up, on practicing with presence, on learning from each experience, we place our attention on something we can actually control. And paradoxically, this often leads to better outcomes because we are not paralyzed by anxiety about results. The Buddhist concept of right effort is relevant here. Right effort does not mean trying as hard as possible or forcing yourself to achieve certain results. It means applying wise, balanced energy to your practice, not too tight, not too loose, like tuning a stringed instrument to exactly the right tension. It means showing up consistently, but not obsessively, trying sincerely, but not desperately, caring about your practice, but not identifying your worth with its outcomes. There is a middle way between not caring at all and caring so much that you crush yourself with expectation. As you rest here, feeling the weight of your body supported, breath flowing effortlessly, without your effort, consider where in your life you might be trying too hard, gripping too tightly, measuring yourself too harshly. What would it be like to approach that area with the Master Archer's instructions? To release expectation, bring presence, allow the action to unfold naturally, and accept whatever result comes with equanimity and curiosity. What if you could trust the process rather than trying to control the outcome? There was once a monastery where monks were expected to memorize and recite lengthy texts as part of their training. One young monk, named Kenji, had a learning disability that made memorization extremely difficult for him. While the other monks could memorize passages after a few repetitions, Kenji needed to repeat them hundreds of times, and even then, he would often make mistakes during recitation. He felt deeply ashamed, convinced that he was failing at being a proper monk, that his mind was simply not capable of the training. The other monks, seeing his struggle, began to whisper that perhaps Kenji was not suited for monastic life, that he should leave and find another path. Kenji himself began to believe this, feeling like a failure who did not belong. One evening, he went to the abbot's chambers and requested permission to leave the monastery. "I have failed," he said, head bowed in shame. "I cannot do what is asked of me. My mind is defective. I do not deserve to be here." The abbot, an ancient monk with kind eyes, was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Kenji, why did you come to this monastery?" Kenji thought back to his arrival years before. "I came because I was suffering. I wanted to understand the nature of suffering and find peace." "And have you found any peace in your time here?" the abbot asked. Kenji considered this honestly. "Yes," he admitted. "When I sit in meditation, when I work in the garden, when I participate in the morning chanting, even though I struggle with memorization, in those moments, I feel peace." "Then you have not failed," the abbot said simply. "You came seeking peace, and you have found it, at least in moments. That is success." "But I cannot memorize the texts like the others," Kenji protested. "I fail at what monks are supposed to do." The abbot smiled. "Tell me, what are monks supposed to do? Who decided this?" Kenji was confused. "It is tradition. It is what has always been expected." "I see," the abbot said. "And who decided that the purpose of memorizing texts is to test whether your mind is good enough? What if the purpose of memorizing texts is something else entirely?" Kenji had never considered this question. He had always assumed the texts were memorized to prove competence, to demonstrate understanding, to separate the capable monks from the incapable ones. "What if," the abbot continued, "the purpose of memorizing texts is to give the mind something wholesome to dwell on, to fill it with dharma rather than with anxious thoughts and worldly concerns? What if the purpose is the process of repeatedly bringing your attention back to the words, training concentration and patience? If that is the purpose, then you, Kenji, who must repeat each passage hundreds of times, are getting far more training than the monks who memorize easily. You are developing extraordinary concentration, extraordinary patience, extraordinary perseverance. By what measure are you failing?" This perspective shocked Kenji. He had been measuring himself by the outcome, how quickly and accurately he could memorize, and finding himself wanting. But if he measured by the qualities being developed through the process, patience, perseverance, humility, dedication, then his struggle was actually developing these qualities more deeply than those who found memorization easy. The abbot went on. Some monks have minds that memorize easily. This is their karma, their particular set of abilities and challenges. They will face their own struggles in other areas, perhaps with pride, perhaps with impatience with those who are slower, perhaps with taking their abilities for granted. Your mind memorizes slowly. This is your karma. But through this challenge, you are developing qualities that will serve you profoundly on the path: humility, perseverance, compassion for others who struggle, and appreciation for small victories. Which is more valuable for awakening, a mind that easily memorizes words, or a mind that develops these essential qualities? Kenji felt tears streaming down his face. For the first time, he was able to see his difficulty not as a shameful failure, but as a particular path with its own gifts. He was not deficient. He simply had a different journey than the other monks, one that was teaching him essential lessons they might never learn. The abbot gave him new instructions. You may continue your memorization practice if you wish, but I am releasing you from the expectation of matching the pace of others. Instead, I want you to focus on being fully present with each repetition. Do not count how many times you need to repeat something. Do not compare yourself to others. Simply meet each repetition with fresh attention, as if hearing the words for the first time. Let the practice itself be the point, not the achievement of memorization. Kenji returned to his practice with a transformed attitude. When he sat with a text, he no longer felt the crushing pressure to memorize it quickly. He simply read it again and again, allowing the words to settle into him at their own pace. Some passages took weeks, some took months, but in that time, those words became part of him in a way they never could have if memorization had come easily. He lived them, breathed them, turned them over in meditation, applied them to his daily struggles. The words were not merely in his memory, they were woven into his being. Years later, Kenji became known as one of the wisest teachers in the monastery, renowned not for his ability to recite texts, but for his ability to embody their teachings, to speak them with a depth of understanding that could only come from such intimate, patient engagement with the words. Students who came to him with their own struggles and feelings of failure found in him a teacher who truly understood what it meant to transform difficulty into wisdom. Kenji's story illustrates a crucial teaching. Our greatest challenges often become our greatest teachers if we can shift our relationship to them. What we call our weaknesses may actually be invitations to develop qualities that people with easy strengths never cultivate. The person who struggles with anger learns patience. The person who struggles with anxiety learns courage. The person who struggles with addiction learns humility and the preciousness of each day of recovery. The person who struggles with learning learns extraordinary perseverance. These struggles, if we can avoid simply labeling them as failures and instead engage with them as teachers, transform us in profound ways. This does not mean we should glorify struggle or seek out difficulty. It means that when difficulty comes, as it inevitably does, we have a choice about how to frame it. We can see ourselves as failing, as deficient, as broken, and add mental suffering to our difficulties. Or we can see ourselves as in training, as developing capacities, as learning lessons that are uniquely ours to learn, and find meaning even in struggle. As you breathe here in the darkness, consider what you have been labeling as your failures or deficiencies. Is there another way to see them? What qualities have you developed through your struggles that you might never have developed if everything had come easily? What wisdom do you carry now that you did not have before difficulty taught you? Can you begin to appreciate your path, with all its stumbles and struggles, as perfect for teaching you exactly what you needed to learn? There is a famous story in Zen about a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbors said, "What bad luck?" The farmer replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned, bringing with it 3 wild horses. The neighbors said, "What good luck?" The farmer replied, "Maybe." The following day, the farmer's son tried to ride one of the wild horses and was thrown, breaking his leg. The neighbors said, "What bad luck?" The farmer replied, "Maybe." The next day, military officials came to the village to conscript young men into the army. Because the farmer's son had a broken leg, he was not taken. The neighbors said, "What good luck?" And the farmer replied, "Maybe." This story teaches us about the relativity of success and failure, gain and loss. What appears to be terrible luck in one moment may turn out to be fortunate in a larger context. What seems like success may lead to unforeseen problems. We simply cannot know, in the moment, whether what is happening is ultimately beneficial or harmful. It unfolds over time in complex ways that our limited perspective cannot fully grasp. This suggests a quality of mind the Buddha called equanimity, remaining balanced and steady, regardless of whether present circumstances seem favorable or unfavorable. This is not passivity or indifference. We still act with wisdom. We still try to reduce suffering and increase well-being. We still have preferences and make efforts toward our goals. But we hold it all lightly, knowing that outcomes are uncertain, that things change, that what seems like failure may be redirection towards something better, that what seems like success may come with hidden costs. We do our best in each moment and accept whatever unfolds with grace. This equanimity is not something we force or fake. It develops naturally as we practice observing the mind, as we see again and again how our judgments and stories create unnecessary suffering, as we notice how things are always more complex and ambiguous than our categories of good and bad, success and failure. We begin to trust the process of life more and trust our anxious evaluations less. There was once a woman named Akiko who was training to become a tea ceremony master, a practice that requires years of study and refinement. Every gesture, every movement, every element of the ceremony must be performed with precision and grace. Akiko was a dedicated student, practicing daily, studying with a renowned master, trying to perfect each aspect of the intricate ritual. But as her training progressed, she became increasingly paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes. The ceremony was so complex, so demanding, that she felt she could fail at any moment, preparing the water at the wrong temperature, whisking the tea with improper rhythm, positioning her hands incorrectly, or worse, dropping something or making some obvious error that would reveal her inadequacy. Her practice, which had begun as something she loved, became a source of intense anxiety. Before demonstrations, she would barely sleep, running through every possible mistake in her mind. During ceremonies, her hands would tremble slightly, and she would be so focused on not failing that she lost all sense of joy or presence. Her master, observing this, decided to teach her a lesson. She invited Akiko to perform a ceremony for a group of important guests, knowing this would provoke intense anxiety in her student. Akiko prepared meticulously, reviewing every step, practicing obsessively. When the day arrived, she was exhausted and tense, barely holding herself together. As the ceremony began, Akiko moved through the familiar motions, trying desperately to remember every detail, to perform flawlessly. But her anxiety made her stiff and mechanical. There was no flow, no grace, just rigid adherence to form. And then, in the middle of the ceremony, as she was whisking the tea, her hand slipped slightly and hot water splashed onto the tatami mat. She froze, mortified. This was exactly the kind of obvious failure she had been terrified of, happening in front of important guests. She felt her face flush with shame, certain that she had disgraced herself and her teacher. But instead of continuing to spiral in embarrassment, she remembered something her master had once said. The ceremony is not about perfection, it is about presence. In that moment, Akiko made a choice. Instead of collapsing into shame or trying to pretend nothing had happened, she acknowledged the spill with a small bow, cleaned it quickly and gracefully with a cloth kept nearby for such purposes, and continued the ceremony. And something shifted. As soon as she stopped trying to be perfect, she became present. Her movements became natural rather than rigid. She could actually feel the tea bowl in her hands, smell the green tea, hear the water boiling, sense the presence of the guests. The ceremony became alive rather than a performance she was anxiously executing. When it concluded, the guests thanked her warmly. One of them said, "That was the most human tea ceremony I have witnessed. When you responded to the spill with such grace, it reminded us that this practice is about being present with reality as it is, not creating some fantasy of flawless perfection. Thank you for that teaching." Akiko's master smiled at her. "You have learned something today that years of perfect performances could not teach you. You have learned that your true practice begins when things do not go as planned. Anyone can perform a ceremony when everything is easy. But to maintain presence, grace, and composure when failure occurs, that is the real mastery. Your spill was a gift." This teaching is profound for anyone gripped by perfectionism and fear of failure. The real test of our practice, of our character, of our development, is not how we perform when everything goes smoothly, but how we respond when things go wrong. Do we collapse into shame and self-judgment? Do we pretend nothing happened, creating tension by denying reality? Or do we acknowledge what happened simply and honestly, address it with competence and grace, and continue on? The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron speaks about this as the practice of failing well. We will all fail repeatedly throughout our lives. The question is whether we fail gracefully or whether we fail while also attacking ourselves, creating two problems where there was only one. When we can fail while maintaining kindness toward ourselves, when we can acknowledge mistakes without making them mean something terrible about our worth, when we can learn from what went wrong and continue on. This is wisdom. Akiko continued her training with a new attitude. She still practiced diligently, still refined her technique, still sought to deepen her skill, but she was no longer trying to avoid failure at all costs. She understood that the ceremony was a practice in presence, and that presence meant being with whatever was actually happening, not with her idea of what should be happening. She had failed publicly, survived it, and discovered that it was not the catastrophe she had feared. In fact, it had opened her practice in a new way. Years later, when Akiko became a master herself and took on students, she would sometimes intentionally make small mistakes during demonstrations, whisking the tea a bit too vigorously so that it splashed, or placing an utensil in a slightly wrong position. Her students would watch, initially confused that the master was making errors. Then she would continue the ceremony with perfect composure, adjusting naturally, demonstrating that mistakes were not failures, but simply part of the practice. She was teaching them what her own master had taught her, that the point was not perfection, but presence, not flawless execution, but genuine connection with the moment as it is. As you lie here now, body heavy with relaxation, mind beginning to drift towards sleep, consider what it might mean to practice failing well in your own life. When something goes wrong tomorrow, when you make a mistake, or do not meet your own expectations, can you respond as Akiko learned to respond? Can you acknowledge what happened without shame, address it with whatever competence you have, and continue on with your day? Can you recognize that the mistake does not define you, does not diminish your worth, does not mean you are fundamentally flawed? Can you treat yourself with the same patience and kindness you would offer to someone you love who was struggling? The Buddha taught about the divine abodes, or Brahmaviharas, 4 qualities of heart that, when cultivated, create the conditions for genuine peace and freedom. These are loving kindness, compassion, empathic joy, and equanimity. Notice that perfection is not on this list. Achievement is not on this list. Never failing is not on this list. The qualities that lead to genuine peace are qualities of heart and presence, not qualities of performance. When we shift our attention from trying to be perfect to trying to be present, from trying to never fail to trying to meet failure with compassion, from comparing ourselves to others to appreciating our own unique path, we align ourselves with what actually leads to peace. There is a traditional Buddhist meditation on death, on the impermanence of life. This might seem like a strange teaching to include in a reflection on failure, but it is actually deeply relevant. When we truly understand that our life is limited, that we will die, and so will everyone we love, that everything we build will eventually crumble, that all achievements are temporary, this could be depressing, or it could be liberating. It is liberating when we realize that in the face of death, our petty failures do not matter nearly as much as we think they do. When you imagine yourself at the end of your life looking back, what will matter? Will you care that you made that mistake at work 20 years earlier? Will you regret trying something and failing at it? Or will you regret not trying, not risking, not living fully because you were too afraid of failure? Most people at the end of life do not regret their failures. They regret the things they did not attempt because of fear. They regret playing it safe, staying small, not telling people they loved them, not pursuing their dreams, not being more authentic and vulnerable. The awareness of death puts failure in perspective. If you only have a limited time in this precious human life, do you want to spend it paralyzed by fear of failure? Or do you want to spend it engaging fully with whatever calls to you, even if success is not guaranteed? The Buddha taught that reflecting on death is not morbid, but clarifying. It helps us discern what truly matters from what we merely think should matter based on conditioning and social pressure. There was once a man named Takeshi who had built a successful company over many years. It was his identity, his pride, his proof that his life had meaning. Then, during an economic downturn, the company failed. He lost everything: his business, his savings, his reputation. He felt that his entire life had been a failure, that everything he had worked for had been for nothing. He fell into deep depression, unable to see any path forward, certain that he was a failure as a person because his business had failed. His wife, worried for him, convinced him to visit a Buddhist teacher who lived simply in a small temple in the mountains. Takeshi went reluctantly, certain that religious platitudes could not help him with such concrete, real-world failure. But when he met the teacher, an old monk named Sato, something unexpected happened. The monk listened to his story without offering any advice or comfort. He simply listened. Then he asked, "Takeshi, how many people did you employ over the years in your business?" Takeshi thought about it. Hundreds, probably close to 1,000 people over the full span. "And you paid them fairly?" Sato asked. "Yes, I prided myself on that. I always tried to compensate people well," Takeshi replied. "And these people, with the money they earned working for you, they fed their families, housed their children, sent their children to school," Sato continued. "I suppose so, yes," Takeshi said, not sure where this was going. "Then you did not fail," Sato said simply. "You created conditions for 1,000 people to live with dignity and provide for their families. The business ended, but that does not erase the good that was done. You are measuring your life only by the final outcome, by whether the business lasted forever. But nothing lasts forever. Everything that begins will end. This is not failure. This is the nature of reality. You succeeded in what actually matters. You used your energy and skill to reduce suffering and create opportunity for many people. The business ending does not undo that." Takeshi felt something crack open in his chest. He had been so focused on the ending, on the loss, on what he considered his failure, that he had not seen the fuller picture. His business had mattered. It had helped people. The fact that it ended did not make the years it existed meaningless. He had been measuring success and failure by permanence, but permanence is impossible in an impermanent world. Sato continued, "The Buddha taught about attachment to outcomes. You became attached to the idea that your business would last forever, that your identity was successful businessman, that your worth depended on this continuing. When the business ended, you felt that you ended with it. But you are not your business. You are not your achievements. You are consciousness that has been expressing itself through various forms and activities. The business was one form. Now you have the opportunity to discover other forms. This is not failure. This is transition, which is the constant truth of all existence. But I am too old to start over, Takeshi protested. I have no energy for it. I feel broken. You feel broken because you are clinging to what was, Sato said gently. When you release that, energy returns. But perhaps you are not meant to start another business. Perhaps this ending is inviting you to discover a different way of being in the world. What if you stopped measuring your worth by external achievement and started measuring it by internal qualities, by kindness, by presence, by wisdom, by service in simpler forms? This was a radical idea for Takeshi, who had spent his entire adult life defining himself by achievement. But he was desperate enough to consider it. He asked if he could stay at the temple for a while to learn about this different way of seeing life. Sato agreed. Takeshi spent 6 months at the temple, learning to meditate, to work in the garden, to cook in the kitchen, to simply be present with whatever task was at hand. At first, it felt pointless. He was used to high-stakes decisions, important meetings, making things happen in the world. But gradually, he began to appreciate the peace of simple work, the pleasure of weeding a garden bed mindfully, the satisfaction of preparing a meal with care, the quiet joy of sitting in meditation without trying to achieve anything. He began to discover a sense of worth that was not dependent on external validation, achievement, or success. He was valuable simply because he was a human being, because his presence and attention and kindness mattered, regardless of what he accomplished. When Takeshi eventually left the temple, he was a different person. He did not start another business. Instead, he began volunteering at a community center, teaching business skills to young entrepreneurs. He found that he could offer his experience and knowledge without needing to prove himself, without needing it to reflect on his worth. He could help others succeed without it needing to be about his own success. He had failed in business by conventional measures, but he had succeeded in transforming his relationship to failure itself. He was no longer defined by outcomes. Takeshi's story demonstrates a crucial teaching, that our identity should not be fused with our achievements or failures. When we identify completely with our successes, we become fragile because success is impermanent and can always be lost. When we identify with our failures, we become depressed and hopeless, unable to see our fuller humanity. The practice is to hold our experiences lightly, to recognize that we are the awareness within which successes and failures arise and pass, not the successes and failures themselves. This does not mean we do not care about outcomes or do not try. It means we are not devastated when outcomes do not go as hoped, because our fundamental worth is not on the line. As you rest here, breathing slowly, feeling yourself sinking into sleep, consider whether you have fused your identity with any particular achievement or role. What would it mean to release that fusion, to discover a sense of self that is deeper than any role you play or any outcome you produce? Who are you when you are not succeeding or failing, when you are simply being? There is a beautiful teaching in Zen about original face. Your face before your parents were born, your nature before all conditioning. Before all stories about success and failure, before all ideas about who you should be. This original face is always present, always pure, always complete. It is never diminished by failure and never enhanced by success. Coming home to this original nature is what spiritual practice is ultimately about. From this place of original nature, we can engage fully with life. We can try and fail and try again. We can achieve things and lose things. We can ride the waves of success and failure without being destroyed by them, because we know that beneath the waves, we are the ocean, vast, deep and fundamentally untroubled. The fear of failure arises from forgetting this deeper nature, from identifying with the small, separate self that feels it needs to prove itself, to achieve, to be worthy. When we remember our deeper nature, fear does not disappear completely. We are still human, still subject to biological fear responses, but it loses its power to control us. We can feel the fear and still act. We can notice the anxiety and still try. We can acknowledge the possibility of failure and still risk. There was once a very young monk who was terrified of everything. Terrified of speaking in front of others. Terrified of being called on during Dharma discussions. Terrified of making mistakes in ceremonies. Terrified of being judged by the other monks. His fear was so intense that he considered leaving the monastery, certain that he did not have the courage required for monastic life. Before leaving, he went to speak with the head monk, a woman named Siren, who was known for her deep meditation practice. He confessed his fear and his intention to leave. Siren listened carefully, then said something unexpected. "Good, you are terrified. That means you are paying attention. Fear is not the problem. The problem is only if you let fear make your decisions for you." The young monk was confused. "But fear is bad, isn't it? Shouldn't I try to get rid of it?" Siren shook her head. Fear is information. It tells you that something feels risky, that you are stepping outside your comfort zone, that you care about what happens. This is not bad. This is your nervous system working exactly as it should. The question is what you do with that information. Do you let it stop you? Or do you say, "Thank you, fear, for trying to protect me, but I am choosing to do this anyway"? This teaching reframes fear entirely. In Western culture, we often treat fear as something to eliminate, as evidence that we should not do something, as a sign of weakness. But in Buddhist understanding, fear is just another experience arising in consciousness, neither good nor bad in itself, just energy moving through the body-mind system. The problem is not the fear, but our reaction to it, either believing everything it tells us and letting it control us, or going to war with it and trying to force it away through suppression or avoidance. The middle way is to acknowledge fear, to let it be present, and to act wisely anyway. Siren continued, "I want you to try an experiment. Tomorrow, I want you to volunteer to speak during our Dharma discussion, to share something about your practice with the group. You will be terrified. Your body will activate all its fear responses, racing heart, sweating, shaking. I want you to let all of that be there. Do not try to hide it or suppress it. Just let yourself be visibly afraid while you speak. If your voice shakes, let it shake. If your hands tremble, let them tremble. Just speak anyway, with all the fear present." The young monk looked horrified. "But everyone will see how afraid I am. They'll judge me as weak." Siren smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe they will respect your courage. True courage is not the absence of fear. It is taking action despite fear. Anyone can do something when they are not afraid. But to do something while afraid, that is the practice of a warrior. I want you to stop pretending you are not afraid and start practicing being afraid with courage." The next day, during the Dharma discussion, the young monk raised his hand. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. When Siren called on him, he stood on shaking legs and began to speak. His voice trembled. His hands shook visibly. He had to pause several times to take breath and steady himself. But he shared something genuine about his practice, about his fear, about his struggle, about his doubt about whether he belonged in the monastery. And when he finished, something unexpected happened. Several other monks came to him afterward and thanked him. They said his honesty about his fear had given them permission to acknowledge their own struggles, that his visible courage had inspired them, that his vulnerability had been more valuable than any polished, confident presentation could have been. One older monk said, "I have been practicing for 20 years, and I still feel afraid sometimes, but I have been pretending I am beyond that. Your willingness to be visibly afraid reminded me that we are all human, all struggling, all doing our best. Thank you." The young monk was stunned. His greatest fear had been that his fear would make him unworthy, would expose him as inadequate. But instead, his willingness to be afraid in front of others had created connection, had helped others feel less alone, had demonstrated something more valuable than fearless competence, genuine humanity. This is a profound teaching about vulnerability and courage. We often believe that we need to hide our struggles, our fears, our failures to be respected and valued. But the opposite is often true. When we are genuinely vulnerable, when we stop pretending to be perfect and instead show up as our messy, struggling, human selves, we give others permission to do the same. We create real connection rather than the superficial connection of people comparing their public successes. The researcher Brené Brown has written extensively about this, demonstrating that vulnerability is not weakness, but the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. When we are willing to risk failure publicly, to try things we might not succeed at, to be seen in our imperfection, we open up possibilities that perfectionism forecloses. The young monk continued practicing this way, volunteering for difficult tasks, speaking up even when his voice shook, trying things he might fail at, being visible in his struggles. Each time, he found that the catastrophe he feared did not happen. Yes, sometimes people judged him. Yes, sometimes he did fail at what he attempted. But he survived each instance, and each survival made him slightly less afraid the next time. He was discovering experientially what the Buddha taught conceptually, that fear loses its power when we stop avoiding what we fear, and instead turn toward it with mindful awareness. As you lie here on the edge of sleep, consider what you are afraid of failing at. What would happen if you tried it anyway, allowing yourself to be afraid, giving yourself permission to fail? What if your willingness to try despite fear is more important than whether you succeed? What if failing courageously is a greater achievement than succeeding safely? There is a koan, a Zen teaching story, about a student who asked the master, "What is the most important thing?" The master replied, "Not to waste time. Time is the one truly non-renewable resource we have. We can make more money, we can find new relationships, we can start new projects, but we cannot make more time. When we spend our limited time paralyzed by fear of failure, avoiding what calls to us, playing it safe to protect an ego that is itself illusory, this is the real failure. Not the failure to achieve specific outcomes, but the failure to show up fully for our own life." The Buddhist teachings on death and impermanence are meant to wake us up to this reality. You have a limited number of days. How will you spend them? In fear or in engagement? In hiding or in showing up? In protecting a false sense of self or in expressing your authentic nature even when it is messy and imperfect? When the Buddha achieved enlightenment, he was tempted by Mara, the embodiment of illusion and distraction. Mara tried many tactics to prevent the Buddha from realizing truth, offering pleasures, threatening with fears, suggesting he was not worthy of enlightenment. But the Buddha simply touched the earth and said, "I am here. I am present. I belong here." This gesture of touching the earth is powerful. It is a statement of presence, of groundedness, of refusing to be moved by doubts about worthiness. No matter what failures we have experienced, no matter what mistakes we have made, we belong here. We belong on this earth, in this life, in this moment. Our failures do not disqualify us from existence, from practice, from love, from trying again. When fear of failure arises, we can touch the earth, literally or metaphorically, and remind ourselves, "I am here, I belong here, I have every right to try, to fail, to learn, to try again." There was once a potter who created a bowl that she considered her masterpiece. She had spent weeks on it, had poured all her skill and care into it, had fired it at exactly the right temperature. When it emerged from the kiln, it was more beautiful than anything she had ever created, perfectly shaped, with a glaze that seemed to glow from within. She was enormously proud of it, certain it would make her reputation as a master potter. She placed it in a position of honor in her workshop. But that night, a small earthquake shook the region. The potter rushed to her workshop and found the bowl shattered on the floor in hundreds of pieces. She fell to her knees in despair. All her work, her masterpiece, destroyed through no fault of her own. She felt the universe had failed her. That trying to create beauty was pointless if it could be destroyed so easily. For days, she could not bring herself to work. What was the point of creating anything if it could be lost? Her teacher came to visit and found her sitting listlessly, staring at the broken shards. The teacher picked up one of the pieces and held it to the light. "This is beautiful," the teacher said. The potter looked up bitterly. "It is destroyed. It is a failure, a loss, a tragedy." The teacher smiled. "It is transformed. It is no longer a bowl, true, but it is something else now. A teaching about impermanence, about the nature of beauty, about attachment. This breakage is as important as the bowl was." The potter did not understand. The teacher continued. "You created a bowl and it was beautiful, but you also became attached to it, identifying it as your masterpiece, believing it defined your worth as an artist. The breaking of the bowl is breaking that attachment. If you can learn from this, it will serve you more than the bowl ever could." The teacher suggested that the potter practice kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the breaks part of the beauty rather than something to hide. Together, they carefully pieced the bowl back together, filling the cracks with lacquer mixed with gold powder. The result was stunning. The bowl was repaired, but now it had golden veins running through it, mapping its history of breakage and repair. It was more beautiful, more interesting, more unique than it had been before. The potter looked at this transformed bowl and understood something profound. The breaking had not been a failure, it had been an opportunity for transformation. The bowl was now more valuable, more meaningful, with its visible history of damage and repair, than it ever had been as a pristine, unbroken object. And so it is with us. Our failures, our wounds, our broken places. When we bring awareness to them, when we repair them with the gold of compassion and wisdom, when we stop hiding them and instead acknowledge them as part of our story, they become our beauty. They become what makes us unique, what makes us human, what makes us capable of connecting with others who are also broken and repaired. The potter never made another perfect bowl. Instead, she began intentionally incorporating visible repairs into her work, using different colors of lacquer, creating pieces that told stories of transformation and imperfection. Her work became sought after precisely because it was honest about brokenness, because it celebrated imperfection rather than hiding it. This is the practice of embracing failure as part of our path, not pursuing failure for its own sake, but when it comes, and it will come, seeing it as raw material for transformation rather than as proof of unworthiness. Our cracks, filled with the gold of awareness and compassion, become our most beautiful features. As you drift towards sleep, imagine your own failures, your own broken places, being filled with golden light. See them not as defects, but as part of your unique beauty, as evidence of your courage to try, to risk, to live fully. See yourself as a kintsugi bowl, more beautiful for having been broken and repaired with care. Let this image settle into your unconscious mind to do its healing work as you sleep. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about interbeing, the understanding that nothing exists separately, that everything is interconnected. Your failures are not isolated events that define you. They are part of a vast, interconnected web of causes and conditions. You did not fail alone. Your failure arose from the meeting of your efforts with circumstances, with your past conditioning, with other people's choices, with timing, with countless factors you did not control and could not see. To take complete personal responsibility for failure, as if you alone created it through your inadequacy, is actually a form of arrogance. It assumes you have more control than you do. that you are more separate from the web of causes and conditions than you actually are. This does not mean we take no responsibility. It means we take appropriate responsibility, acknowledging our part in what happened, learning what we can learn, making amends where needed, but not carrying the entire weight of every outcome as if we are the sole cause. When we understand interbeing, failure becomes less personal. Yes, we participated in it, but so did many other factors. Our job is to learn what we can and continue on, not to carry failure as a permanent identity. There was once a farmer who worked very hard to prepare his fields and plant his crops. He did everything right, tilled the soil properly, planted at the right time, watered diligently. But that year, a drought came. His crops failed. By some measures, he was a failure as a farmer that year. But did he fail? He did everything within his power wisely and well. The failure of the crops was due to factors beyond his control. The weather, the climate patterns, forces vastly larger than one farmer. He could learn from the experience, perhaps plant more drought-resistant crops in the future, perhaps develop better water storage systems, but to condemn himself as a failure would be to misunderstand his actual relationship to the outcome. This is true for so many of our failures. We are not sole creators of outcomes. We are participants in complex, interconnected processes. When outcomes do not go as we hoped, we can ask, what was within my control? What did I do well? What could I learn for next time? What was simply the result of circumstances beyond my influence? This more nuanced view prevents the total self-condemnation that the fear of failure creates. As you breathe here in the darkness, consider a failure you have been carrying as proof of your inadequacy. Can you see it instead as the result of many interconnected factors? Can you acknowledge your part without taking inappropriate blame? Can you see that failure as a moment in a much longer story, not the defining moment of your identity? The practice of Buddhism is training in this more balanced, more realistic, more compassionate way of seeing ourselves and our experience. Meditation is the laboratory where we practice observing our thoughts and feelings without being controlled by them. When we sit and watch our mind, we see fear arise. We see self-judgment arise. We see the comparing mind arise. And we practice not believing these are ultimate truths. We practice seeing them as just weather patterns moving through the sky of awareness. Off the cushion, in daily life, we practice bringing this same quality of observation. When the fear of failure arises before we try something new, we can notice it. Ah, fear is here. When self-judgment arises after we make a mistake, we can notice it. Ah, the judging mind is active. And in that noticing, there is a small gap, a moment of choice. We do not have to be swept away by these mental patterns. We can acknowledge them and choose to act from wisdom rather than from conditioned fear. This is the freedom the Buddha pointed to, not freedom from difficult experiences, but freedom within them. Freedom from being completely controlled by our conditioned reactions. This freedom develops gradually through practice, through repeatedly choosing to meet our experience with awareness and compassion rather than with judgment and fear. Each time we make this choice, we strengthen the neural pathways of wisdom and weaken the pathways of fear. Each time we fail and treat ourselves with kindness, we teach ourselves at a deep level that failure is survivable, even workable. Each time we try again after failing, we prove to ourselves that we are resilient. There is a beautiful teaching about the Bodhisattva path. A Bodhisattva is someone who vows to help all beings achieve liberation, to work for the reduction of suffering in the world. But the vow is not, I will help all beings after I myself become perfect, after I transcend all my own failures and limitations. The vow is to help all beings now, with whatever capacity we have, in our imperfect, still learning state. The vow itself is more important than our readiness. This teaching invites us to serve, to contribute, to show up for what matters to us now, without waiting until we feel we have transcended our fear of failure, without waiting until we are perfect. Whatever you care about, Whatever calls to you, you can begin now. You can contribute your imperfect efforts, your learning in progress, your messy first attempts. The world does not need your perfection. The world needs your genuine engagement, your willingness to try, your care and attention, your unique perspective even in its unpolished form. When we wait to be perfect before we offer ourselves, we rob the world of our gifts, and we rob ourselves of the opportunity to grow through doing. There was once a student who wanted to be a writer. She had dreamed of writing since childhood, but by her 30s, she still had not written anything substantial. Every time she sat down to write, the fear of failure overwhelmed her. What if her writing was not good enough? What if she had nothing important to say? What if she tried and failed to be a writer, and then she would have to give up the dream entirely? As long as she did not try, she could still imagine herself as a potential writer. But if she tried and failed, she would have to face the possibility that she was not a writer at all. So she did not try. One day, she encountered a teaching from the writer Ray Bradbury, who said, "Just write every day of your life. Read intensely. Then see what happens. Most of my friends who are put on that diet have very pleasant careers." This simple instruction cut through her fear. She did not have to worry about whether she was a good writer or whether she would fail. She just had to write every day and see what happened. The outcome was not in her control, but the practice was. She began to write daily, giving herself permission to write badly, to write things she would never show anyone, to fail at capturing what she wanted to say. And something remarkable happened. By removing the pressure of succeeding, by simply showing up to practice every day, she began to improve. Her writing became more natural, more authentic. She began to find her voice not through some dramatic moment of achievement, but through the gradual accumulation of daily practice. Some days she wrote things that were genuinely good. Most days she wrote things that were mediocre or bad. But all of it was part of learning. All of it was developing the capacity that could eventually create good work. After a year of daily writing, she had a drawer full of failed attempts, and also a few pieces she was genuinely proud of. She submitted one to a literary magazine, expecting rejection. It was accepted. She was surprised, but also realized that the acceptance was not actually the most important thing. The most important thing was that she had become someone who wrote every day, someone who showed up for her practice, regardless of the outcome. She was a writer, not because she had been published, but because she wrote. This shift from outcome-focused to practice-focused identity is liberating. You are not a failure if you are practicing. You are only a failure if you let fear stop you from practicing. The writer continued her daily practice for years. She was rejected many times. She wrote many things that never found an audience. But she also published some pieces, completed a book, found readers who connected with her work. All of this came not from overcoming her fear of failure, but from practicing anyway while the fear was present, from showing up daily to write regardless of whether the previous day's writing had been good or bad. She had learned what the Buddha taught. Suffering comes from attachment to outcomes. Freedom comes from dedicating yourself to practice while holding outcomes lightly. Try your best, then release the results. As you rest here now, body relaxed, mind quiet, consider what practice calls to you. What would you do if you could release the attachment to a particular outcome and simply show up to practice? What would you try if you could stop asking, "Will I succeed?" and simply ask, "Am I showing up today?" The Buddha taught about the middle way, the path between two extremes. In relation to our topic, the middle way is between two extremes. On one side, never trying anything difficult, playing it safe, avoiding all possibility of failure. On the other side, being reckless, trying things without wisdom, ignoring real limitations and responsibilities. The middle way is wise effort, trying things that matter to you, taking reasonable risks, preparing as well as you can, then engaging with uncertainty and accepting whatever results come. It is neither paralyzed by fear nor foolishly ignoring it. It is courage combined with wisdom. This middle way acknowledges that yes, you might fail, But it also acknowledges that not trying is its own form of failure, a failure to live fully, to express yourself, to discover what you are capable of. So you prepare, you practice, you take wise precautions, and then you leap. And if you fall, you get up, learn what you can, and leap again. This is the path. There is a famous teaching from the Zen tradition: fall down 7 times, get up 8. This is not just about persistence, though it includes that. It is about a fundamental commitment to continuing, to not letting failure be the end of the story. The 8th time you get up, you are not the same person who fell down the first time. You have learned 7 times, developed 7 times, deepened 7 times. Your willingness to get up again is itself a transformation. In the Christian tradition, there is a concept of grace, unearned love, and forgiveness. Buddhism has a parallel in the concept of Buddha nature, the understanding that your fundamental nature is already enlightened, already perfect, regardless of your actions or achievements. You cannot earn this nature, and you cannot lose it. It is simply what you are, beneath all the layers of conditioning and story. When you touch this understanding, you realize you have nothing to prove. You have not failed to be what you truly are. That is impossible. You have only temporarily forgotten it, and you can remember again at any moment. This is ultimate release from the fear of failure. There is nothing you need to achieve to be worthy. You already are worthy, completely, by virtue of being consciousness itself. By virtue of being part of this interconnected web of existence, by virtue of being capable of awareness and compassion. Your achievements add nothing to this fundamental worthiness. Your failures subtract nothing from it. It simply is, unchangeable, like the sky is always the sky whether there are clouds or clear blue. As sleep begins to claim you, let this truth settle deep into your being. You are not your successes. You are not your failures. You are the awareness within which successes and failures arise and pass. You are the sky, not the weather. You are the ocean, not the waves. Rest in this understanding. Let the fear of failure dissolve like mist in morning sun. You are held by something much larger than your small self and its concerns. You are part of the vast unfolding of existence, playing your unique part, learning your unique lessons, contributing your unique presence. This is enough. You are enough. Right now, exactly as you are enough. Tomorrow, when you wake, you will still be human. You will still feel fear sometimes. You will still face the possibility of failure in whatever you attempt. But perhaps you will remember something from tonight, some small shift in perspective. Perhaps you will try something you have been avoiding. Perhaps you will treat yourself with more kindness when you make a mistake. Perhaps you will recognize that the voice telling you that you are a failure is just a voice, just a thought, not the ultimate truth of who you are. The Buddhist path is not about achieving some permanent state where you never feel fear or never fail. It is about developing a different relationship with your experience, one characterized by awareness, compassion, and equanimity. It is about recognizing that you are not broken and do not need to be fixed. You simply need to wake up to what you already are beneath all the stories. There was once a very old woman who was dying. Her granddaughter sat beside her, holding her hand, and asked, "Grandmother, you have lived such a long life. What was the most important thing you learned?" The old woman thought for a long moment, then smiled. "I learned that I spent too much of my life afraid of doing things wrong. I wish I had failed more, tried more, risked more. The things I regret are not my failures but my hesitations, the times I let fear make me small. If I could live again, I would make many more mistakes, because each mistake meant I was living fully rather than hiding." This deathbed wisdom is what the Buddhist teachings on impermanence are trying to convey to us while we still have time to live differently. Do not wait until you are dying to realize that your fear of failure has been keeping you from your life. Realize it now, and then make a choice about how you will live from this day forward. Will you let fear decide, Or will you decide, with wisdom and courage, to engage fully with your life even when the outcome is uncertain? As you slip into sleep now, let go of everything. Let go of success and failure, of good and bad, of right and wrong. Let go of your identity, your story, your need to be any particular way. Just rest as pure awareness, as the space in which all experiences arise. In this space, there is no failure because there is no one to fail. There is just the dance of existence, expressing itself in infinite forms, learning through trial and error, growing through the interplay of effort and outcome. You are that dance. Whole, complete, never actually broken no matter how many times you fall. The Buddha's final words were said to be, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This captures the beautiful paradox of the teaching. Yes, everything is impermanent. Everything changes. Everything you build will eventually crumble, including your successes and your failures. And strive on with diligence. Do not let the impermanence of outcomes paralyze you into inaction. Instead, let it free you. Since nothing lasts, you might as well try, might as well risk, might as well give yourself fully to what calls you, because the alternative, holding back, playing it safe, protecting yourself from failure, that does not lead anywhere better. It just leads to a smaller life, unlived. Strive on with diligence, knowing that the striving itself is the point, not the achievement. Strive on with diligence, bringing your full presence and care to each moment, each task, each attempt. Strive on with diligence, getting up each time you fall, learning each time you fail, growing through the entire process. This is the path. This is freedom. This is the release from fear of failure, not by never failing, but by failing well, by failing with grace, by failing forward into growth and wisdom. Let yourself rest now in this understanding. Let your body fully relax. Let your mind fully release its grip. Let yourself sink into the deep peace that is always available beneath the surface concerns of success and failure. This peace is your birthright. This peace is your nature. Return to it again and again, especially when fear arises, especially when you fail, especially when you are convinced you are not good enough. Return to this peace that knows you have always been good enough, that you are an expression of the universe experiencing itself, that you cannot actually fail at being what you are. Tomorrow is a new day, full of possibility. You will try things. Some will work out, some will not. And all of it will be part of your path. All of it will be teaching you. All of it will be the perfect curriculum for your awakening. Trust this. Trust the process. Trust that even your failures are serving you, shaping you, leading you toward wisdom and compassion. Trust that you are held by something larger than yourself, that you are never truly alone in your struggles, that countless others have walked this path of learning to release the fear of failure. You are part of an ancient lineage of human beings learning to be fully human. Messy, imperfect, stumbling, rising, trying again. There is a meditation instruction that says, "Let everything be as it is." This is the ultimate release. Let your fear be as it is. Just fear, just sensation, just thought. Not evidence of anything except that you are alive and care about outcomes. Let your failures be as they are. Just events, just experiences, just information, not definitions of your worth. Let your successes be as they are, pleasant when they come, but not the source of your value. Let yourself be as you are, imperfect, learning, growing, sometimes strong and sometimes weak, sometimes clear and sometimes confused, always doing your best with what you have. Let the world be as it is, unpredictable, uncontrollable, full of both beauty and suffering, offering both triumphs and defeats. When everything can be as it is, when we stop fighting with reality, demanding it be different than it is, demanding we be different than we are, then there is peace. Not the peace of perfect circumstances, but the peace of acceptance, the peace of presence, the peace of resting in what is, rather than exhausting ourselves trying to control what cannot be controlled. This is the peace the Buddha offered. This is the peace that is available right now, in this moment, regardless of your past failures or future uncertainties. It is here, in the gentle rise and fall of your breath, in the sensation of your body resting, in the awareness that knows all of this. It is here, waiting for you to stop struggling and simply notice it has been here all along. And so, as you drift into sleep, know that you are practicing even now. You are practicing letting go, practicing trust, practicing rest. Sleep itself is a lesson in release. You cannot force it. You can only allow it. You practice releasing control, releasing effort, releasing the need to manage everything, and sleep comes naturally. So too with the fear of failure. You cannot force it away, but you can practice releasing your grip on it, and gradually, naturally, it loses its power over you. Sleep well, dear practitioner. Sleep deeply, and know that when you wake to a new beginning, to fresh possibility, to another chance to practice living without the fear of failure controlling your choices. You wake to another day of being human, which means another day of trying, and sometimes failing, and trying again. And this is beautiful. This is the practice. This is the path. There is an ancient Buddhist blessing. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. May you live with ease. Tonight, receive this blessing for yourself. May you be happy, even with your imperfections. May you be healthy, in body and mind and spirit. May you be safe, held by the vast web of existence. May you live with ease, releasing the unnecessary burden of fear, accepting yourself as you are. And as you accept yourself, may you inspire others to do the same. May your willingness to be imperfect give others permission to be imperfect. May your courage to try and fail encourage others to try. May your compassion for yourself when you fall teach others to be compassionate with themselves. This is how we heal together, not by all becoming perfect, but by all accepting our shared humanity, our shared vulnerability, our shared experience of sometimes failing and always being worthy of love anyway. You are part of this healing. Your journey with fear of failure is not just personal. It is part of the larger human journey toward wisdom and compassion. Every time you treat yourself kindly after a mistake, you make it a little easier for someone else to do the same. Every time you try something despite being afraid, you add your courage to the collective courage of humanity. Every time you get up after falling, you strengthen the resilience of our species. You matter. Your practice matters. Your willingness to work with your fear rather than being controlled by it matters, not because you need to prove anything, but because you are part of this interconnected whole, and your healing contributes to the healing of all. Rest now in this understanding. You are held. You are supported. You are part of something much larger than yourself. The fear of failure is a small thing, a ripple on the surface of a vast ocean. You are that ocean, deep, powerful, essentially undisturbed by surface conditions. When you remember this, when you touch this truth even for a moment, the fear loses its grip. Tomorrow, you may forget again. The fear may return. You may face something difficult and feel inadequate. This is normal. This is human. When it happens, remember that this too is practice. Notice the fear. Feel it in your body, acknowledge it with compassion, and then ask yourself, what would I do if I were not afraid? What matters more than my comfort? What is worth the risk of failure? And then, if it seems wise, do that thing. Take that step. Risk that failure. Not recklessly, but courageously. Not ignoring your fear, but acting despite it. This is the practice. This is the path. This is how you gradually free yourself from the tyranny of fear, not by eliminating it, but by learning to act wisely in its presence. And now, Let everything go. Release your hold on these teachings, these words, these ideas. Let them settle into your unconscious to do their work while you sleep. Trust that what you need to remember will be available to you when you need it. Trust the wisdom of your own being, which knows how to integrate and apply these teachings in your unique life. Trust the process of growth, which happens in its own time, often in ways you cannot see or measure. Trust that you are exactly where you need to be on your path, that your struggles are not mistakes but necessary parts of your development, that everything is unfolding as it must. Sleep now. Deep, restful sleep. Let your body repair itself. Let your mind process and integrate. Let your spirit rest in the peace that is always available. You have done enough today. You are enough today. Rest in that sufficiency. And when you wake, wake gently. Wake with kindness toward yourself. Wake ready to meet the new day with presence and openness. Wake ready to try and possibly fail and try again. Wake ready to be human, which is all you ever needed to be. The fear of failure is released not once and for all, but again and again. In each moment, you choose awareness over reactivity, compassion over judgment, action over paralysis. This is the practice. May you practice well. May you fail well. May you live well. May you be free.